So in today's video we are reading Stephen King's Dr. Sleep, and it is a very descriptive book. There is some swearing, and it's very hard for some people to hear, but if you want to hear it, stay tuned. But it's just a little disclaimer. So see you in the next video. Unknowns. Goodbye. Chapter 1. Lockbox. On the second day of December, in a year when a Georgia peanut farmer was doing business in the White House, one of Colorado's great resorts and hotels burned to the ground. The Overlook was declared a total loss. After an investigation, the fire marshal of Chicory County ruled the cause had been a defective boiler. The hotel was closed for the winter when the accident occurred, and only 4 people were present. They survived. The hotel's off-season caretaker, John Torrance, was killed during an unsuccessful and heroic effort to dump the boiler's steam pressure, which had been mounted to dangerously high levels due to an operative release valve. 2 of the survivors were the caretaker's wife and young son. The third was the Overlook chief, Rick Halloran, who had left his seasonal job in Florida and came to check on Torrance's because what he called a powerful hunch that the family was in trouble. Both surviving adults were quite badly injured in the explosion. Only the child was unhurt, physically at least. Wendy Torrance and her son received a settlement from the big corporation that owned the Overlook. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to get them 5 for 3 years. She was unable to work because of back injuries. A lawyer she consulted told her that if she were willing to hold out and play tough, she might get a great deal more because the corporation was anxious to avoid a court case. But she, like the corporation, wanted only to put that disastrous winter in Colorado behind her. She would convalesce, she said, and she did, although back injuries plagued her until the end of her life. Shattered vertebrae and broken ribs healed, but they never ceased crying out. Winford and Danny Torrance lived in the Mid-South for a while, then drafted down to Tampa. Sometimes Dick Halloran, he of the powerful hunches, came up from Key West to visit them. To visit with young Danny, especially. They shared a bond. One early in March of 1981, Wendy called Dick and asked if he could come. Danny said, had awoken her in the night, and told her not to go in the bathroom. After that, he refused to talk at all. He woke up needing to pee. Outside, a strong wind was blowing. It was warm. In Florida, it almost has always been. But he did not like the sound, and supposed he would never. It reminded him of the Overlook, where the defective boiler had been the very last of the dangers. He and his mother lived a cramped second-floor tenement apartment. Danny left his little room next to his mother's and crossed the hall. The wind gusted and dying palm trees outside the building clattered its leaves. The sound was skeletal. They always left the bathroom door open when no one was using the shower or the toilet because the lock was broken. Tonight, the door was closed, not because his mother was in there. However, thanks to facial injuries she suffered at the Overlook, she now snored a soft queep queep sound, and he could hear it coming from her bedroom. Well, she closed it by accident, that's all. He knew better, even then. He was supposed a powerful hunch and intuition himself. But sometimes you had to know. Sometimes you had to see. This was something he had found out at the overlooking room of the second floor. Reaching with an arm that seemed too long and too stretchy, too boneless, he turned the knob and opened the door. The woman from room 217 was there, as he had known she would be. She was sitting naked on the toilet with her legs spread and her pallid thighs bulging, her greenish breasts hanging down like deflated balloons. The patch of hair below her stomach was gray. Her Her eyes were also gray, like steel mirrors. She saw him, and her lips stretched back in a grin. "Close your eyes," Dick Halloran had told him once upon a time. "If you see something bad, close your eyes and tell yourself it's not there. And when you open your eyes again, it will be gone." But it hadn't worked in room 17. When he was 5 and it wouldn't work now, he knew it. He could smell her. She was decaying the woman. He knew her. It was Mrs. Massey, lumbred to her purple feet, holding out her hand to him. The flesh on her arms hung down, almost dripping. She was smiling the way you do when you see an old friend, or perhaps something good to eat, with an expression that would have been a mistake for calmness. Stanley closed the door softly, stepped back. He watched as the knob turned right, left, right again, and then stilled. He was 8 now, and capable of at least some rational thought, even in his horror. Partly because, in a deep part of his mind, he had been expecting this, although he always thought it would be Horns Derwent who would eventually show up, or perhaps the bartender, the one his father called Lloyd. He supposed he should have known it would be Mrs. Massey, though even before it finally happened, because of all the undead things in the Overlook, she had been the worst. The rational part of his mind told him she was just a fragment of an unremembered bad dream that had followed him out of his sleep. And across the hallway to the bathroom, that part insisted that if he opened the door again, there would be nothing there. Clearly, there wouldn't be now that he was awake, but other parts of him, a part that shone, knew better. The Overlook wasn't done with him. At least one of its vengeful spirits had followed him all the way to Florida. Once he had come up with the woman sprawled in the bathtub, she had gotten out and tried to choke him with her fleshy but trembly strong fingers. If he opened the bathroom door, now she would finish the job. He compromised by putting his ear against the door. At first there was nothing. Then he heard a faint sound, a dead fingernail scratching on wood. Then he walked into the kitchen on not their legs, sat on a chair and peed into the sink. Then he woke up his mother and told her not to go into the bathroom, because there's bad things there. Once that was done, he went back to bed and sank deep beneath his covers. He wanted to stay there forever, only getting up to pee in the sink. Now that he had warned his mother, he had no interest into talking to her. His mother knew about the no-talking thing. Happened after Danny ventured into room 217 at the Overlook. We would talk to Dick. Lying in his bed, looked up at her. He nodded. His mother called even though it was 4 in the morning. Late the next day, Dick came. He brought something with him, a present. After Wendy called Dick, she made sure Danny heard her doing it. Danny went back to sleep. Although he was now 8 and in 3rd grade, he was sucking his thumb. They had to see him doing that. She went into the bathroom door and stood looking at it. She was afraid. Danny had made her afraid. But she had to go in, and she had no interest of using the sink as he had. The image of how she would look carrying off the edge of the counter, with her butt hanging over the porcelain, even if there was no one there to see, made her wrinkle her nose. In one hand, she had the hammer from a little box of the window tools. As she turned the knob and pushed the bathroom door open, she raised it. The bathroom was empty, of course, but not the ring of the toilet seat was down. She had never left it like that, way before going to bed because she knew if Danny wandered in only 10% awake, he would have to forgot to put it up and piss all over it. Also, there's a smell, a bad one, as if a rat died in the walls. She said she took a step in, then two. They saw movement and rolled hammer up, rising to hit whoever was hiding behind the door. It was only her shadow, scared of her own shadow. People sometimes sneered, but who had a better right than Wendy Torrance? After the things that she had seen and been through, she knew that the shadows could be dangerous. They could have teeth. No one was in the bathroom, but there was a discolored smear on the toilet seat, and another in the shower. Certain experiment was her only first thought, but shit wasn't yellowish purple. She looked more closely and saw bits of flesh and decaying skin. There was more on the bathroom mat in the shape of footprints. She had thought them too small, too dainty to be a man's. Oh God, she whispered. She ended up using the sink after all. Wendy nagged her son out of bed at noon. She managed to get a little soup and half a peanut butter sandwich into him. But then he went back to bed. He still wouldn't speak. Halloran arrived shortly after 5 in the afternoon, behind the wheel of his new accent, but perfectly maintained and blinding polish, red acrylic. Willie had been standing at the window waiting and watched as she had once waited and watched for her husband, hoping Jack would come home in a good mood and sober. She rushed down the stairs and opened the door just as Dick was about to ring the bell, marked Torrance 2A. He held out his arms, and she raised him to them at once, wishing she could be enfolded there at last an hour, maybe 2. He let go and held her at arm's length by her shoulder. You're looking fine, Wendy. How's the little man? You talking again? No, but I'll ask to talk to you. Even if he won't do it out loud to start. With you can. Instead of fishing, she made a finger gun and pointed at his forehead. Not necessarily, Dick said. His smile revealed a bright new pair of teeth. The overlook had taken most of the last set on the night the boiler blew up. Jack Torrance swung a mallet that took Dick's dentures and Wendy's ability to walk without a hitch in her stride. But they both understood it had really been the overlook. He's very powerful, Wendy. If he wants to block me out, he will. I know from my own experience. Besides, it'd be better if we talk with our mouths. Better for him. Now tell me everything that happened. After she did that, Wendy took him to the bathroom. She had left the stain for him to see, like a beat cop pursuing the scene of a crime for the forensic team. And there had been a crime, one against her boy. Dick looked for a long time, not touching, then nodded. Let's see if Danny's up and in the doings. He wasn't, but Wendy's heart was lightening by the look of gladness that came into her son's face when he saw who was sitting beside him on the bed and shaking his shoulder. Hey Danny, I brought you a present. It's not my birthday. When he watched them, knowing they were speaking, but not knowing what it was about, Dick said, Get up, honey. Going on a walk on the beach. Dick, she came back. Miss Massey from room 217 came back. Dick gave his shoulder another shake, too loud. Danny, you're scaring your ma. Danny said, What's my present? Dick smiled. That's better. I like to hear you. And Wendy does too. Yes, it was all she dared say. Otherwise, they hear the tremble in her voice and be concerned. She didn't want that. While they were gone, you might want to give the bathroom a cleaning. Dick said to her, "You got kitchen gloves?" She nodded. "Good. Wear them." The beach was 2 miles away. The parking lot was surrounded by toward beachfront attractions, funnel cake concessions, hot dog stands, souvenir shops. But this was the tag end of the season, and none were doing much business. They had the beach itself almost entirely to themselves. On the ride from the apartment, Danny held his present, an oblong package, quite heavy, wrapped in silver paper, on his lap. "You can open it when we talk a bit," Dick said. They walked just above the waves, where the sand was hard and glimmy. Danny walked slowly because Dick was pretty old. Someday he'd die, maybe even soon. "I'm good to go another few years," Dick said. "Don't you worry about that. Now, tell me last night. Don't leave any out." I didn't take long. The hard part would have been finding a word to explain the terror he felt, and how it was mingled with significant sense of certainty. Now that she had found him, he'd never leave. But because it was Dick, he hadn't needed words, although he found some. "She'll come back. I know she will. She'll go back and come back until she gets me." "Do you remember when we met?" Although surprising at the change of direction, Danny nodded. It had been Halloran who gave him his present, the guided tour on their ferry the day of the overlook. Very long ago, that seemed. "And do you remember the first time I spoke up inside your head?" "I sure do." "What did I say?" "You asked me if I wanted to go to Florida with you." "That's right." "And how did that make you feel, to know you wasn't alone anymore? That you wasn't the only one?" "It was great," Danny said. "It was so great." "Yeah," Halloran said. "Yes, of course it was." They walked in silence for a bit. Little birds, peeps, Danny's mother called them, ran in and out of the waves. "Did it ever strike you funny how I showed up when you needed me?" He looked down at Danny and smiled. "No, it didn't." "Why would it? You was just a child, but you're a little older now. A lot older in some ways. Listen to me, Danny. The world has a great way of keeping things in balance. I believe that. There's a saying, when a people is ready, the teacher will appear. I was your teacher." "You are a lot more than that," Danny said. He took Dick's hand. "You were my friend. You saved us." Dick ignored this, or seemed to. "My grandma also had shining. Do you remember me telling you that?" "Yeah. You said you and her could have a long conversation without even opening your mouth." "That's right. She taught me, and it was her way. Great-grandma that taught her. Way back in the slave days. Someday, Danny, it will be your turn to be the teacher. The people will come. If Mrs. Massey doesn't get me first," Danny said hoarsely. They came to a bench. Dick sat down. "I don't dare you go any further. I might not make it back. Sit beside me. I want to tell you a story." "I don't want stories," Danny said. "She'll come back. Don't you get it? She'll come back and come back and come back. Shut your mouth and open your ears." "Take some instruction." Then Dick grinned. displaying his glimmer new dentures. I think you'll get the point. You're far from stupid, honey. Dick's mother's mother, the one with the shining, lived in Clearwater. She was the white grandma. Not because she was Caucasian, of course, but because she was good. His father lived in Dumpre, Mississippi, a rural community not far from Oxford. His wife had died long before Dick was born. From a man of color in that place and time, he was wealthy. He owned a furniture parlor. Dick and his parents visited 4 times a year. Young Dick Halloran hated those visits. He was terrified of Andy Halloran and called him only in his mind to speak aloud would have you earned a smack across the chops. The Black Grandpa. I'm gonna give a warning right here if anybody's still listening. This is a really descriptive part of the book, so if you don't like child abuse or things bad happening to kids, I would, might not want to listen to this part, but here we go. You know about kitty fiddlers? Dick asked Danny. Guys who want children for sex. Sort of, Danny said cautiously. Certainly he knew not to talk to strangers and never get in a car with one, because they might do stuff to you. Well, old Andy was more than a kid fiddler. He was a damn sadist as well. What's that? Someone who enjoys giving pain. Danny nodded in immediate understanding, like Frank Liverstone at school. He gave kids Indian burns and Dutch rubs. If he can't make you cry, he stops. If he can, he'd never stop. That's the bad. But the worst. Dick lapsed into what would have looked like signs to a passerby. But the story went forward in a series of pictures and connecting phrases. Danny saw the Black Grandpa, a tall man in a black suit, as he was, who wore a special kind of fedora, hat on his head. He saw how there was always little buds of spit on each corner of his mouth, and how his eyes were red, rimmed like he was tired or had just gone over crying. He saw how he would take Dick, younger than Danny, was probably the same age he had been that winter at the Overlook, on his lap. If they weren't alone, he might only tickle. If they were, he'd put his hand between Dick's legs and squeeze his balls until Dick thought he'd faint with the pain. Do you like that? Grandpa Andy would pen in his ear. He smelled of cigarettes and white horse scotch. Gross. You do. Every boy likes that. But even if you don't, you damnedest tell. If you do, I'll hurt you. I'll burn you. Holy shit, Danny said. That's gross. There are other things too, Dick said. But I'll just tell you one. Grandpa hired a woman to help around the house after his wife died. She cleaned and cooked. At dinner time, she sat out everything on the table at once, from salad to dessert, because that's the way old Black Grandpa liked it. Dessert was always cake or pudding. It was put down on a little plate or in a little dish next to your dinner plate, so you could look at it and want it while you plowed through the other muck. Grandpa's hard and fast rule was you could look at dessert, but you couldn't eat dessert unless you finished every bite of fried meat and boiled greens and mashed potatoes. You even had to clean up the gravy, which was lumpy and didn't have much taste. If it wasn't all gone, Black Grandpa would hand me a hunk of bread and say, "Sober up with that. Dickie Bird, make that plate shiny, lick it like the dog licked it." That's what he called me, Dickie Bird. Sometimes I could finish no matter what, and then I didn't get to eat cake or pudding. He'd eat it himself. And sometimes when I could finish all my dinners, I'd find he'd smash a cigarette butt in my piece of cake or vanilla pudding. He would do that because he always sat next to me. He'd make me like it. It was a big joke. Oops, Miss Astor, he'd say. Mom and Pa never put a stop to it, although they must have known that even if it was a joke, it wasn't fair one to play on a child. They just made it out like it was a joke too. That's really bad, Danny said. Your folks should have stood up for you. My mom does. My daddy would too. They were scared of him, and they were right to be scared. Andy Holland was a bad motorcycle. He'd say, go on, Dickie, and eat around it. That won't poison you. If I took a bite, he'd have Nani, that was his housekeeper, he'd bring me a fresh dessert. If I wouldn't, just sat there. It got so I could never finish my meal because my stomach would get all upset. You have moved your cake or pudding on to the other side of your plate, Danny said. I tried that, sure. I wasn't born food. He just put it back, saying dessert went on the right. Dick paused, looking at the water, where a long white boat was strewn slowly across diving lines between the skyline and the Gulf of Mexico. Sometimes, when he'd got me alone, he'd bite me. And once when I said I'd tell Pa if he didn't leave me alone, he put a cigarette on my bare foot. He said, tell him that too, and see if it was good, does you? Your daddy knows my ways already, and he'll never say a word, because he yelling, and because he wants the money I got in the bank when I die, which I ain't fixing to do soon. They listened in wide-eyed frustration. He had always thought the story of Blue Bread was the scariest of all time, the scariest there ever could be. But this one was worse because it was true. Sometimes he said that he knew a bad man named Charlie Minx, and if I didn't do what he wanted, he'd call Charlie Minx on a long distance, and he'd come into the fancy car and take me away to a place for bad children. Then Grandpa would put my hand between my legs and commence squeezing. So you ain't gonna say a thing, Dickie Bird. If you do, old Charlie will come and keep you with the other children. He done so until you die, and when you do, you'll go to hell, and your body will burn forever because you are peaked. It don't matter if anybody believes you or not. Preteen is peaking for a long time. I believe the old bastard. I didn't even tell a white grandma, the one with the shiny, because I was afraid she'd think it was my fault. If I had been older, I would have known better, but I was just a kid. He paused. There was something else, too. Do you know what it is, Danny? Danny looked into Dick's face for a long time, probing the thoughts and images behind the forehead. At last, he said, you wanted your father to get the money, but he never did. No. Black Grandpa left it all to a home for Negro old friends in Alabama. And I bet I know why. Tucson, neither here nor there. And your good grandma never knew. She never guessed she was there with something. But I keep blocking away, and she left me alone about it. Just told me that when I was ready to talk, she was ready to listen. Danny, when Andy Holleran died, it was a stroke. I was the happiest boy on earth. My ma said I don't have to go to the funeral, that I could stay with Grandma Rose, my white grandma, if I wanted to. But I wanted to go. You bet I wanted to. Make sure the old black grandpa was really dead. It rained that day. Everybody stood around the grave under black umbrellas. I watched his coffin, the biggest and best one in the shop. I have no doubt going into the ground, and I thought about all the times he had twisted my balls, and all the cigarette butts in my cake, and the one he put on my foot, and how he ruled the dinner table like a crazy old king in the Shakespeare play. But most of all, I thought about Charlie Max, who Grandpa had no doubt made up of a whole clot, and how Black Grandpa could never call Charlie Max on a long distance to come in the night and take me away in his fancy car to live with other stolen boys and girls. I peeped over the edge of the grave. Let the boys see, my ma said. My mom tried to pull me back, and I scooped the coffin down in that wet hole, and I thought, down there you're 6 feet closer to hell, Black Grandpa, and pretty soon you'll be all the way, and I hope the devil gives you 1,000 with a hand that's on fire. Dick reached into his pant pocket and brought a pack of Marlboros with a box of matches tucked on the cell phone. He put a cigarette in his mouth, and then he had to chase it with the match because his hands were trembling, and his lips were trembling too. Then he was astounded to see tears standing in Dick's eyes. Now knowing where the story was headed, Danny asked, "When did he come back?" Dick dragged deep on a cigarette and exhaled the smoke through a smile. "You didn't need to peek inside my head to get that, did ya?" "Nope." 6 months later, I came home from school. One day, he was laying naked on my bed with his half-rotten prick all reared up. He said, "You come and have a seat on this, Dickie Bird. You give me thousands, and I'll give you 2,000. I screamed, but there was no one there to hear it. My ma and pa, they was both working. My ma and her pa in the restaurant, my dad printing press. I ran out and slammed the door, and I heard Black Grandpa get up, thump. Across the room, thump, thump, thump. And what I heard next, fingernails," Danny said in a voice that was hardly there, clacking on the door. "That's right. I didn't go in again until that night, when my mom and pa were both home. He was gone, but they were leaving, sure, like in our bathroom, because he's going to bed. That's right. I changed my bed myself, which I could do because Ma showed me how 2 years before. He said I was too old to need a housekeeper anymore. The housekeeper were for little white boys and girls like the ones she took care of before she got her hosting job at Berkland Steakhouse." About a week later, I see old Black Grandpa in the park. He's sitting in a swing and had his suit on, but it was all covered with gray stuff. The mold was growing on it, down in his coffin, I think. "Yeah?" Danny said. He spoke in glassy whispers. It was all he could message. His fly was open, through his work sticking out. "I'm sorry to tell you all this, Danny. You're too young to hear about it, such things, but you need to know. Did you go to White Grandma then?" "Had to, because I knew what you knew. He'd just kept coming back, not like..." "Danny, have you ever seen dead people? Regular dead people, I mean." He laughed, because it sounded funny. It did to Danny, too. "Ghost? A few times. Once there was 3 of them standing around a railroad crossing. 2 boys and a girl, teenagers, I think. Maybe they got killed there." Dick nodded. "Mostly they are sticked close to where they crossed over until they finally get used to being dead and move on. Some of the folks you saw in the Overlook were like that." "I know." The relief in being able to talk to someone about these things, to someone who knew, was incredible. And this was one time there was a woman at a restaurant, the kind you know where you have tables outside. Dick nodded again. I could see through that one, but no one else saw her, and when the waitress pushed the chair she was sitting in, the ghost lady disappeared. "Do you see them sometimes?" "Not for years. Hope you've gotten stronger in The Shining then." "I was. It goes back, some as you get older." "Good," Danny said frivolously. "But you have to get plenty left even when you grow up. I think because you started with so much. Regular ghosts aren't like the woman you saw in 217 and again in your bathroom. That's right, isn't it?" "Yes," Danny said. "Mrs. Massey, real. She leaves pieces of herself. You saw them. So did Mom. And she doesn't shine." Let's walk back, Dick said. It's time you saw what I bought you. The return to the parking lot was even slower because Dick winded cigarettes, he said. Do you ever start, Danny? Don't you ever start, Danny? Mom smokes. She doesn't think I know, but I do. Dick, what did your white grandma do? She must have done something because your black grandpa could never got you. She gave me a present, same like I'm going to give you. That's what a teacher does when the pupil is ready. Learning itself is a present. You know, the best one anybody can give or get. She wouldn't call Grandpa Andy by his name. She'd call him Dick Grinned, the pervert. I said, what you said, that wasn't a ghost. He was real. And she said, yes, that was true, because I was making him real. With the Shining, she said, though some angry spirits mostly, won't go on from this world because they know what's waiting for them is even worse. Most eventually starve away to nothing, but some of them find food. That's what the Shining is to them, Dick. She told me, food, you're feeling the pervert. You don't mean to, but you are. He's like a mosquito. He'll keep circling and then landing for what blood. Can't do anything about that. What you can do is turn what he came for against him. They're called back at the Cadella. Dick unblocked the door and then slid behind the steering wheel with a sign of the relief. Once upon a time, I would have walked 10 miles and run another 5. Nowadays, a little walk down the beach, and my back feels like a horse kicked it. Go on, Danny, open your present. Danny stripped off the silver paper and discovered a box made of green metal. On the front below the latch was a little keypad. Hey, neat. Yeah, you like it? Good. I got it at West Auto Pure. American Steel, the one white Grandma Rose gave me, had a padlock with a little key. I wore around my neck, but it was long ago. This is the 1980s, the modern age. You see the number pad? What you do is you put 5 numbers you're sure you won't forget, then push the little button and say set. Then anytime you want to open the box, you punch in your code. Danny was delighted. Thanks, Dick. I'll keep it special things in it. These would include the best baseball cards, his Club Scout compass bag, his lucky green rock, and a picture of him and his father taken on front lawn of the apartment building where they lived in Boulder before the Overlook, before things turned bad. That's fine, Danny. I want you to do that, but I want you to do something else. What? I want you to know this box inside and out. Don't just look at it, touch it, feel it all over. Stick your nose inside of it and see if there's smell. It needs to be your closest friend, at least for a while. Why? Because you're going to put another one just like that in your mind. One that's even more special. And the next time they see Mrs. Massey's bitch come around you, you'll be ready for her. I'll tell you now, like old white Grandma told me. Danny didn't speak much on the ride back to the apartment. He had a lot to think about. He had his pendant, a lockbox made of strong metal on his lap. Mrs. Massey returned a week later. She was in the bathroom again, this time in the tub. Danny wasn't surprised. The tub was where she had died, after all. This time he didn't run. This time he went inside and closed the door. She backed on forward, smiling. Danny came also smiling. In the other room he could hear the television. His monitor was watching the companies. Hello, Mrs. Massey, Danny said. I brought you something. At that moment, she understood and began to scream. Moments later, his mom came knocking at the bathroom door. Danny, are you all right? Fine, Mom. The tub was empty. There was goo in it, but Danny thought he could clean it up. A little water could send it right down the drain. Do you have to go? I'll be out pretty soon. No, I thought I heard you call. Danny grabbed his He gave her a big smile. It wasn't hard now that Mrs. Massey was gone. The troubled look in her face. Good. Make sure you brush your teeth, the back ones. That's where the food gets to go hide. I will, Mom. From inside his head, far inside, where twins of his special lockbox are stored. On a special shelf, Danny could hear muffled screaming. He didn't mind. He thought it would stop soon enough, and he was right. 2 years later, on the day before Thanksgiving breakaway, halfway up Desert Stairway in Alpha Elementary, Horns Delward appeared to Danny Torrance. There was confetti on his shoulders, on his suit. A little bat mask hung around the cane hand, and he reeked of the grave. Rape party, isn't it? He asked. Danny walked away very quickly. When school was over, he called Dick long distance at the restaurant where Dick worked in Key West. Another one of Dick's overlooked people found me. How many boxes can I have? In my head, I mean. Dick chuckled. As many as you need, honey. That's the beauty of The Shining. You think my black grandpa's the only one I've ever had to lock away? Do they die in there? This time, there was no chuckle. This time, there was coldness in Dick's voice. The boy had never heard before. Do you care? Danny didn't. When the one-time owner of Overlook showed up again shortly after New Year's, this time, Danny in his bedroom closet, Danny was ready. He went into the closet, closed the door. Shortly afterwards, a second metal lockbox went up on the high metal shelf beside that one that Mrs. Massey was. There was more pounding, some intuitive cursing that Danny saved for his own later use. Pretty soon it stopped. There was silence from the Doherty lockbox, as well as Mrs. Massey lockbox. Whether or not they were alive and their undead fashion no longer mattered. What mattered was they were never getting out. He was safe. That was what he thought then, of course. He also thought he would never take a drink, not after seeing what it had done to his father. Sometimes we just get it wrong. That was chapter 1 of Dr. Sleep by Stephen King, and I will be reading the next one probably in a later video, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in the next video.